Well, smoky whiskey. Whiskey and Bandaids. The perfect pairing. I'm Daniel Whittington. I'm the Chancellor at Wizard Academy and Whiskey Marketing School. And I need to open this bottle. This is in response to a question from Grumpy of Art 8150. He says, can you explain the plastic Band-Aid model glue smell and taste in Scotch? Yes, I can. One evening while in Edinburgh, Scotland, I stepped into S&WS. While there, the bar servers were fantastic. I tried a few Scotches, which I explained what I liked, and one that I did not like, which was the above-mentioned Scotch. Yeah, okay. So, let me go back, and by the way, S&WS in Edinburgh, hell yeah, it's a great visit. I figured this was the right whiskey for this. A lot of the notes that I took just to remind myself of these things, so these are all things that I've studied at length in multiple programs that I've worked with. But while I was just doing a quick Google refresher to remind myself of chemical names and things like that, I stumbled onto two articles, and so I'm going to quote them even though I just sort of used them as a refresher. And this is Matthew Ferguson Stewart, who, and I'll put these links in the description, who did one article, and Dan Nozowitz, who did an article for Science magazine, Pop Science, and these are great sort of synopsis. There's also an article in Slate called Why Do We Like Bitter Foods? I'll put that link down here. And these were just like refreshers, reminders. Good God. See if even from the camera, can you smell this? It's going to take a second. Smoky whiskey. You smell the smoke? Yeah. Good God. Okay. So, a thing that distinguishes human beings as a species is our ability and sort of desire for bitter foods. In evolution, our ability to distinguish bitter and plants' desire to become bitter was a way to become unattractive to animals and thus save themselves, right? For us, we developed it to recognize things that were maybe poisonous or were bad for you, but that's not true of all bitter things. And there's something about humans, we love the dangerous things. So as soon as we get past survival mode to where we're pretty much sure we're gonna survive, we love to reintroduce into our lives little safe hints of danger in forms of food or experiences. Danger that's reminds us of danger, but without any real risk. And so you end up with capsaicin being something that people search for and eat hotter and hotter peppers because, woo, I can feel alive. And same thing with, various other bitter, astringent aspects of things. Coffee, for example. Now, we've also, because of that, discovered that there's actually health positives in bitter-type foods, like vegetables and things like this, right? Humans have more sensors for bitter variations than any of the other taste variations. So we've got small amounts of variables between sweets and things like this, but we got a lot of specific sensory variables for the categories of bitter. We've really developed this attraction to variations of bitter. One of most recognizable, this is a direct quote, one of the most recognizable flavors in Scotch comes from a chemical compound called phenol. Phenols, right? Now, people like to think that phenols equal smoke. Not true. In Scotch, you can find phenols in unsmoked, unpeated whiskeys. Now, they're micro and they're very different. Phenols are not one thing. Phenols don't equal smoke. There are subcategories of phenols, and this is phenol. There's subcategories of phenol, and they all head different directions. Now, when you smoke or peat a whiskey, which means you burn peat to dry the barley absorbs it, and then you run and I can't believe I lost the word for breaking up grain. You mill. So the grain is milled, and then you mash it and ferment it, and then you distill it, and these phenol chemical compounds make it all the way through all those processes, and they show up in distillation towards the mid to back end of hearts, down into the tails cuts of whiskey, because they're big, heavy, oily, viscous things, right? And when you smoked and peated something, the lower you cut down, the deeper and more of those phenol characteristics you get. This is a subcategory of phenols called creosols. And that's what you get when you smoke things, right? Creosols. It's in meat, it's in anything that's smoked, right? It's also in barley. But here's the other thing. Creosol, and there's ortho, meta, and para creosol. Ortho creosol, meta para. God, this is such a nerdy video. They are very commonly used to dissolve other chemicals, which makes them very useful in cleaning products, disinfectants, deodorants. As a matter of fact, the most famous one, Lysol, right? So, creosol, the chemical that goes into Lysol and some of these other disinfectants, has very well-known antibiotic properties, or works well with antibiotic products. And so you also find the same chemical strain in the production of Bandaids or hospital disinfectants. And that's why when you get a really smoky whiskey, some people will pick it up and go, it smells, quote, medicinal. Why? Because you are actually picking up on the identical chemical that is common to smoked whiskey and medicine products. You're drinking medicine. That's what I tell myself anyway. It's just medicine. But this is why you pick something up like a really peated scotch and go, ooh, Band-Aids. Ooh, you see what I mean? So there are a couple of other phenol characteristics that are different than this, but the creosol ones are specifically that sort of medicinal direction, right? Now, let's talk Octomore, which is from Bruichladdich, and I've got both. I love this line, and I have very few negative things to say about Octomore, maybe almost none, really one. And that is, I would argue that when they publish, I'm pulling this down because this always cuts my finger. When they publish the phenolic phenol per million part, right, of peat smoke, when they smoke the barley, it can be misleading. Because the thing is, you can make the smokiest barley on the planet, but if you run it through a still and you cut really, really high, you can eliminate all of those phenols. So even if you had the smokiest grain, you still get to choose how smoky you want the new make based on where you cut. And so when they publish things, which is a ppm 128.9 on the barley, it's not the same thing as what's in the bottle. Now, I don't know, maybe Octomore is now showing peat parts per million on the finished product, and actually I don't know. I thought originally it was about the grain. But when you distill, you choose how much you want to keep of that. And so a lot of people go, it's really, really, really peaty grain. Well, yeah, fine, but how do you cut it? Because that changes what you're tasting. There's a lot of people using Baird's peated malt or Simpson's peated malt from Scotland to create completely different flavor profiles, more and less smoky, entirely dependent on the cuts. A lot of Islay distilleries, for example, using the exact same peated barley with the exact same peat parts per million on the grain, creating more and less smoky whiskeys on the outside. Because that's how that works. The cuts change the phenolic presentation. Now, Octomore is their Bruichladdich's successful endeavor of doing really, really, holy crap, smoky whiskey. which I think is great. So, and I also love that Octomore has always embraced a lower age statement for these releases, because what I want from this is to taste the actual quality new make and grain notes that are still alive, because you're not going to get as much impact from those things as they age. As you age a whiskey, the phenolic notes are one of the things that leave. And so you can get a 25-year-old Lafroig that is very not smoky and really soft and really pretty. Why? A lot of those things oxidize and age out and evaporate out. So to get a highly peated whiskey at its most grain forward, smoke forward, yes, you've got to go a little bit younger. And Octomore did that, and I love it about them. So this is the Octomore 14.1. This was distilled in 2017, 100% Scottish-grown concerto barley, malted to 128.9 ppm, fine, aged for 5 years in ex-bourbon barrels. And sure enough, what do you get? Grain, vanillin, a little bit of the toasted wood, burnt wood, a little bit of mostly vanilla, but maybe, no, I was going to say spice, but the spice, yeah. There's a spice in there, but it's every time I try to pinpoint it, it sort of like disappears behind the smoke. The smoke is king on this one. This is definitely but smoke like ashy smoke. Like your clothes the day after a campfire, wet, like if you've walked through a house after someone put out a fire, a burnt house, you ever walked through a space like that? Or a campfire after someone poured water all over it, there's this smell of damp old campfire, and it's definitely heads in the direction of damp old campfire. It's briny and salty, but really there's a lot of vanilla in this, which I'm assuming is coming from the bourbon barrels. Oh, man, that's good. Very grainy. This is almost 60% alcohol. It's 59.6. There's a lot of new make and grain, and I love that. It's not for everybody. I would argue that Octomore is a whiskey maker's whiskey. Like, when you've had to make whiskey and you've learned to acclimate to the flavors of new make and to appreciate new make notes, then I'll find that it's really a lot of makers and industry people that appreciate young whiskeys because they see what's happening with the grain. And you get to go, oh, that's really high quality new make going into that. And I found that with Waterford. I found that with a lot of American craft. But the consumers, when they experience that and like, what is that? It's like, oh, that's grain. You've never tasted that before because everything you drink is between 6 to 10 to 12 to 15. You're not getting the new make grain notes. But in the younger stuff, you get the new make grain notes. And they're, I think, something to appreciate to the same level that some people appreciate smoke. And in Octomore, you get both. Really smoky, but a glimpse at the grain. Okay, so let's get even more nerdy. Phenols don't only come from smoking grain. Phenols are a low compound that can also be added in from the barrel. Why? Because you char and toast a barrel. And when those chemicals dissolve into the spirit, you get phenols added into the whiskey. Now, in a barrel added, so you get an overlap. Only smoke is the creosoles, right? Only barrel tends to be this direction called, it's vanillin and eugenol. Eugenol? Or E-N-O-L. I swapped the E and the O. Anyway, that's from the barrel. Vanillins, which is vanilla, is in the phenol family. And, also from the hemicellulose structure, or the cellulose structure and all of that too. Vanillin's structure. And then eugenol is clove and clove oil. So if you get a clove sort of spice note because of barrel aging, that's in the phenol family. Now, then there's an overlapping chemical structure that comes from both barrel and from smoking grain, and they are syringol and guaiacol, and I'm not pronouncing them correctly, guaiacol. They're different structures, similar structures, but different in how they present. So if you get a bonfire active smoky note, that's syringol. It's got an aroma, but it has no flavor. If you get a bonfire-y smoky flavor, but not an aroma, that would be guaiacol. And this is what shows up in liquid smoke products, right? And so when you smoke barley, you get, and the barrel, they both add both of those phenolic compounds to it. And so you can get some whiskey that presents like a bonfire-y smoke, and that's those compounds. And you can get some whiskey that presents like this sort of medicinal, and that's all because of the smoked grain. And then you can get some that are just these like clove and vanillins, and that's all barrel. And all of those are phenolic compounds. But if you've ever had a Band-Aidy medicinal, that means you're dealing with smoked grain, most likely, at some level. I hope that's helpful. Not just for the nerds. Cheers to you. I'm really glad you're here. All of the phenols want you to like and subscribe. Mostly the creasoles, though. Mostly the creasoles.